Hello everyone, my name is Leonard Monkman and we are live from Treaty 1 territory, also the homeland of the Métis Nation. Thank you for joining us. On Sunday, Alberta Premier Rachel Notley was given a traditional Blackfoot name and a headdress at a powwow in Lethbridge, Alberta. The powwow's organizers say that she was given the headdress to thank her for the work that she has done in their region and also as an opportunity to build bridges. But not everybody agrees with that decision to gift sacred items. Today we are joined by former Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs Grand Chief Derek Nepenak. Derek is from Pine Creek First Nation and is an Anishinabeg. We are also joined by Ivana Yellowback. Ivana is from Manitou CP Cree Nation. She is an instructor and works with Indigenous girls in the criminal justice system. She is Ininahuac. Ininahuac? Yeah. Okay. And we are also joined by Wambadi Wakita. Wambadi is a Dakota grandfather who is from Sioux Valley First Nation. And he is also working at the University of Manitoba with the Access program. As usual, feel free to send any questions, any comments that you have. We remind people to keep it respectful and we'll try to get them onto our panel. The first question that I have for Derek is, how do you get a headdress? I know that you have one.
Miigwech, Leonard. First of all, I just wanted to say that this is a very complex issue. And when you're going to engage complex issues that go to the spirituality of our various nations here on Turtle Island, you have to set ground rules. And I think one of the ground rules is obviously respect, and I thank you for raising that. But the other is kindness as well. And a lot of the dialogue I've seen back and forth so far is demonstrating a lot of lack of kindness, you know, because this is about spirituality. This goes to the core of some of our ceremonies, and I think that's the respect and the recognition that's due there. Now, my headdress came to me first through recognition of my leadership, through my direct counsel that I worked with in Pine Creek when I was a younger leader. It was later affirmed through ceremony. That ceremony was out on the land 5 days by myself without food and water, and that's where the feathers came from. So there's been a number of ceremonies since that time where the headdress that I wear has been reaffirmed through Sundance, through fasts and other ceremonies, and it's in that way it creates a living spirit within that headdress, which presents itself whenever I wear the headdress and whether I speak through it. I also have a symbolic headdress that was passed to me as the Grand Chief of the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. I still have that headdress as a symbol of leadership, and I was also given a headdress when I was in South America by a small community of Indigenous people very close to my heart. They also granted me a headdress in their style in Colombia in South America. So I'm recognized as a chief there too.
Sweet. Wambadi, I talked to you earlier this week and you said that you had a headdress. How do you get a headdress?
I got my headdress made by my older brother. And the reason why he gave me that headdress was because of the many years of Sundance that I've been to. And I only wear that headdress when I get up to speak at the Sundance ceremonies. And so I keep that headdress in good order. I don't take it anywhere. I don't use it for any other purpose. I just keep it like that, the way that I understand my members, my Dakota families, the way that they keep their headdresses and the way that they receive their headdresses and how to use it.
The next question that I would have for the panel is, who should wear a headdress?
In terms of who should wear a headdress, I think that's all determined through ceremony. And, you know, candidates are identified through, I think, community service, commitment to our spirituality, commitment to our ceremonies, and of course acts of bravery and leadership. And that's if we're looking at, you know, excluding people, I don't think anybody's excluded from that category of leadership, because leadership comes in all forms, shapes, and sizes across you know, the human experience. So it's not limited, but it is, I think, determined by actions and commitment.
Ivana, who do you think should wear a headdress?
I think the same thing as well in terms of leadership, and those that really do the work in terms of heart work and are all about the well-being of the people and the communities, not only the people but as well as the lands and just overall health.
Wambadi, what does the headdress represent?
I guess the headdress could represent a number of things, especially how it's received. Like the way I understand it is that someone would get a vision from up there, and they would proceed to follow that vision and share it with their family and the community, and put that vision into action. And if it's about a headdress, someone would go out and have to ask for an eagle, or maybe even a hawk, for instance. It's not always an eagle, but it's done in a ceremony, in a sacred manner. So, and people know about this, so they support that. It's called culture. They support that culture and the way things are done. And back at home, the old people used to say, when you get an eagle in some form, you take this eagle on top of the hill and you make a cry with it, and then you offer your offerings to the eagle nation, because you're going to you give thanks to this eagle that come to you, and you're going to use it for some reason. And so that's how I understand things to be done in our community.
I would like to remind anybody that's watching, feel free to send in any questions, any comments that you have, and we'll do our best to try to get them answered. The very first, I guess a question that I would have is, what were your initial thoughts when you seen Rachel Notley getting a headdress this weekend?
Well, it caused me to reflect, and I want to thank the Blackfoot people for raising the profile of this discussion, because I think that it's always worthwhile to engage in the cores of our ceremony, the core of our spirituality. So, it caused me to reflect on my own process, and my headdress sits in my home right now, and it's resting, and I care for it from time to time. I thought, it's good that the ceremony is front and center for young people to see that we're still doing our ceremonies in a good way. I was hopeful that politics wasn't mixing with ceremony, because I've always said, keep politics outside of our ceremony, because hierarchy doesn't belong in our ceremonies. And I was hopeful that that wasn't influencing any of the discussion. I remain hopeful that this was all done in a good way for the right reasons. But it was a good opportunity for us to reflect as individuals, as well as Indigenous people, on the sacredness of our ceremonies.
Ivana, what were your initial thoughts seeing it on social media?
My initial thoughts, just based on what I seen on my own social media, was there was a lot of not necessarily just to one nation, but all nations were feeling a bit kind of like hurt a little bit, maybe a little bit distraught. There was a lot of conversations, again, just stating in regards to the dialogue. There was a lot of words kind of thrown around back and forth. And for what I've seen for a lot of Indigenous women and young women and girls was a lot of confusion as to why someone that, in terms of the government, that is, Mr. Gosawak Esque, how she, and I understand there's different reasonings behind it, but it was just it was very confusing as a Native woman to sit there and to see that. And just in terms of all the things that are happening in our communities with Indigenous women and girls. And I remember seeing online there was a conversation where I think it was 2016, there was an article where it asked who should be wearing headdresses, and it talked about the woman. There was a woman in Saskatchewan that was given a headdress because she was the chief of her community, and there was some backlash in regards to that. So there was a lot of confusion, and I'm only speaking from experience as a Native woman. It was, when I first seen it, it was very interesting to me, and right now there's a lot of reflection going on in terms of what that feeling is like.
Wambadi, what were your initial thoughts seeing Rachel Notley in a headdress this weekend?
I when something like this comes up, I immediately think about our people, the way that they done things long ago. And my thinking was, there is a meaning and a purpose for all things that are going on, and the way that it comes up is, if there is an issue or a concern, they talk about that, they reach a decision, they make a decision, and then they put it into action, and that decision is always for the good of the community. And the other thing that comes to my mind is there are some things, of course, we have our Dakota way of doing things, culture, natural law. I call them natural law that comes from up there, and they too, the Blackfoot and other nations, they have their own way of doing things too. So, and I agree that if it's done, my belief has always been to follow that vision that you get, to do ceremony, to whatever the ceremony brings, you share it, you bring it out to the community, to your family and to the communities, and then you put it into action. That way everybody knows what's going on, and that there is help and support in whatever is being brought to the community.
We do have a comment from Locrayan Mohican. They say, some that were given headdresses should not have the honor. She deserves to wear one. I'm assuming she's talking about Notley. Chrissy Green says, as a photographer, I don't like seeing sexy women wearing headdresses in photo shoots. Joan Jack says, what about Indigenous women? Times change. I'm personally so sick of misogyny in Indian country, and a Mohawk once told me that spirituality is the highest form of politics. Is there a larger discussion here to be had around Indigenous women wearing headdresses?
Sure, I'll comment on that. I know in my community, Minnegozibi Anishinaabe, the Pine Creek Indian Band or First Nation, however you want to refer to it, our chief has a headdress. And I need to have a chief who is empowered, enabled, proud, and strong in what she does. Mm-hmm. And I support her in her headdress, 100%. Mm-hmm. And I've also seen and been part of Blackfoot ceremony where the Women's Headdress Society opens up the ceremony, opens up the dialogue in a very beautiful way. And I respect that very much. And there is a place, as far as I'm concerned, for women in headdresses.
Mm-hmm. Ivana?
I agree in the same way in terms of that reclamation of our spots within ceremony, within our nations. A lot of Indigenous nations are matriarch, and you find a lot of ceremonies in terms of the teachings go back to the woman, especially within my nation. Even the word esquel comes from the word esquitu, which is the fire, that central fire. And so just kind of that reclamation of our space, and being able to take up that space, because within the society that we currently live as Indigenous women and girls, we have so much gendered intersectionalities in terms of racism, oppression, and colonial history, and past and present, that we are dealing with, that our girls are dealing with every single day. So to see strong women in leadership, Indigenous women, that our young women can look up to, that brings a lot of hope and healing, that brings a lot of inspiration, especially to our young women and girls that are suffering with low self-esteem in terms of the colonial dialogue that is present in society today.
Mm-hmm. Diane Hunter asks, Anna Heffernan asks, whose decision should it be to give someone a headdress or an eagle feather? Maybe we'll throw that one to you, Wamadi.
I think when people have a vision, that's a sacred thing already. And it's not made by a person who didn't get a vision and just starting to do things on their own. Those man-made laws cause a lot of trouble in our communities. And the other thing is we're traveling off this, what I call the red road that was given to Indigenous people, our Dakota people. Instead, we're going off on a different road. A lot of that is not our fault. There's lots of obstacles put on our road that caused us to go off in a different direction. And I'm talking about the politics that are played, and the Indian Act and the residential school and all kinds of different things like that that has nothing to do with our culture. And so to say that the old people, you know, they didn't make too much fuss, because at that time the culture was kind of intact. Now we're kind of losing this, what I call culture. Culture, by the way, is the language, and it's the ceremonies and the prayers and the songs and the dances, and we're kind of losing that, and it's changing, and I think it's really our fault that we didn't share enough information with the young people to be able to know why they're doing these things. And you know, there's always a purpose and a reason for doing something, and especially realizing that there's sacredness involved, and anything that comes from up there, that's sacredness. And you gotta realize how we need to put that into action. I see that people who don't recognize that sacredness and not follow those instructions from the holy ones, I see that there's turmoil in the community, and that's what we're going through right now. One of the reasons why people are making a talk about this is because when we go through something and it isn't very good, in a little while something negative comes out, and I hear that lots from across this world here, not only Indigenous people.
Jason DG Noam says, does it make sense that only chiefs and above should have the ability to get headdresses? You talked about chiefs getting headdresses earlier this week. Would you be able to say something about that?
Yeah, I think that I think it's wrong to think that leadership and the qualities that raise a question about who should have a headdress are completely within the political vacuum. I think that
The Indian Act.
Yeah, I think that it's wrong to think that way. I think there are many great leaders that we fail to recognize from within our communities who, if leadership is symbolized by the headdress, should have a headdress. It's not just an action where you go and cast a ballot and maybe you win a vote in a local election, or maybe you win a vote at a regional level, and then all of a sudden you're entitled to a headdress. That is not the case at all.
So you would say that not all chiefs deserve a headdress?
I would say that for sure. For sure, I would say that. I would also say that there are great leaders out there who were never a chief, but should deserve to have their leadership recognized through the symbolism of a headdress.
Ivana?
Was that in terms of the chiefs?
Yeah.
Like Indian Act chiefs?
Yeah.
The Indian Act system is so complex, and it's rooted in terms of the history. It goes way back. And I find that, I remember I was actually reading a post, I think a while back, where they talked about how the Indian agents actually came onto our communities, and they had the Indian Act, and they said, yeah, like your leadership is cool right now, but here, check out this book. This is how you guys are going to be doing your leadership for the time being, and then you guys can go back to what it was like, whether you had hereditary chiefs, and whatever that system looked like previously. And then ever since then, they just never came back or said anything, and that's just been the process since. And just the whole, Indian Act process is so problematic in terms of even having elections every 2 to 3 years. And there's a lot of people that state, how is there going to be change within that short period of time when you're electing, again, a whole bunch of people, new people coming in to try and continue these projects forward.
Every 2 years.
Possibly. So I just feel in terms of the Indian Act leadership, it doesn't reflect the land in terms of what the land taught us about leadership.
Pawastel Chartrand says, when I got my one eagle and hawk feather, I was so overwhelmed with emotion. It was one of the most precious moments of my entire life. 2 feathers, it meant so much to me. I'm starting to be worried about the washing out of the importance of receiving even 1 feather, never mind an entire headdress. Bear Lake John Noel asks, does that mean she, as in Rachel Notley, has been adopted? Do you know if she's been adopted?
She didn't say anything about adoption.
Let's see here. Lisa Smith Baldwin says, my non-native brother was recently gifted a headdress as a warrior for working for over 15 to 20 years with the Blackfoot in Lethbridge with their veterans and given a name. It was seen by him and his family, including myself, as a great honor. I guess we could take a second to talk about giving non-Indigenous people or allies names. How do you feel about that, Wambadi?
You know, my feeling, my experience, my memory is still the same, that you wait for some instruction from up there, and then you go ahead and discuss what this means, how you understand these sacred instructions. And once you figure that out, once you understand that, you accept it and then put it into action. It's when we human beings, we're poor. You know, human beings are poor because we lost our naturalness inside of us. We shut our feelings off. Well, our thinking is kind of went over sideways, and our total physical body is in poor shape, and our spirit is gone outside of our body. And how are we to operate if we have all of these dysfunction inside of us? And the way to as I understand, and I went through this what I call dysfunction and this healing, that I needed to get my feelings back, that I needed to go to a ceremony to click my two brains into a center, and my body needed to be in a healing way, and my spirit. I went to a ceremony to put my spirit back into my body. And then once you recognize yourself here, then you're able to connect to the outside things, like your family, for instance, or your food, or your clothing, your work, whatever it is. It's so that's still my thinking about that.
Yeah.
When someone receives, like this young man or this man here receiving one eagle, that's a very big deal. Today I see young people coming and say, here's a package of tobacco, or a little, I just got one today, this morning. I gave a little tobacco to talk, to share some words. Well, I'm going to take that to the ceremony tonight, and I'm going to put it on the altar, and I'm going to make prayers about that. What do this group of people, what do they need? And that's my belief. It takes a long time to figure things out, especially something that comes from up there. Our people call that the mystery, and it is. We don't know what's going to happen this afternoon. We don't know what's going to happen tonight. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's still my belief, is that we got to wait for things to be not man-made laws. It's hard.
I know that there's a lot of really good non-Indigenous people out there that have made long-lasting relationships with Indigenous folks. How do you feel about non-Indigenous people getting ceremonial names?
I think that it's, I think back to a couple of teachings I've received, and one of them was that the way we're treating the land, it will take us back to a point where we recognize that there will need to be a nationhood of humanity that arises, that knows no color or boundary between racism and different races in the world today. And I think that if we interpret that and we apply it to ceremony, it means that we can Sundance with anybody, no matter where they come from in the world. We can gift people appropriately within our ceremonies. Our cultures don't exist in a bubble. We have to be willing to recognize that we have beautiful gifts within our cultures to share, and that's what I think the ceremonies create, that opportunity to recognize. It's that hope that we can build bridges, And I have no issue with that at all. What I would say, however, is that, you know, there's let's get our own kids named. Let's get our own kids recognized with names and colors, and instill that pride of identity within them through these ceremonies first and foremost, before we look too far beyond you know, our own backyard for people deserving of these things.
I feel that, you know, race is a social construct. It's what we're socially taught in terms of society and the narratives that are given. But in terms of that, you know, we all have spirits. We're all human beings. And, you know, who's to say that can keep something in terms of spirit away from an individual? You know, they may need that during that time and would help with them within their lives. And I also agree about our young people and our youth and our children having that process facilitated first and foremost, because they are the ones that are up and coming. And there's actually a prophecy that was stated by Isaac Murdoch, actually shared it, and it's on a rock painting, and they talked about this figure with two snake arms, and stating that this figure was going to come in and steal the children. And at the end of the prophecy, in terms of the rock painting, there's a baby with an eagle feather in their hair. And it states that as long as our children have their culture, their identity, their language, their connection to the land, they will always come back home. And you know, with the high rates of a lot of our youth within the criminal justice system, they said 90% in Manitoba are Indigenous, 60% are children currently in care, with 11,000 youth, 90% Indigenous. I think that's where we need to focus first and foremost, is what's going on in terms of our community and the legacy of the Indian Act and the residential schools, and focus at our home fires first.
We do have a comment from Wally Wapachi. They say, I don't think gifting politicians is a good idea. I think their wages and the fact they like being where they want to be is a gift enough, because they were elected to office. That's a big gift of confidence. Do you think that Rachel Notley should have a headdress? We'll go this way, just a quick answer.
I think that was up to the Blackfoot Nation. There's a reason why they done that. It's not for me to say, oh yeah, well, she shouldn't have. All the negative talk about this is pointing to us as having a hurt inside of our body. We have a pain inside of our body. We have a wound. And if we're not careful, it's going to get infected. And if we don't deal with infection, we're going to die. We've experienced that time and time again. So my thinking is, yeah, what about that guy? You think he deserves a car? I think he should get a car? Or, you know, what about this person over here? You know, we are focusing a little bit off the road a little bit. We need to come back and look at ourselves, and then look at our families. You know, it's hard. I learned about that, the hardship that comes from inside, and the criticism that we give out, the negative thinking, all of those kinds of things, and we really Indigenous people, boy, they still have a great contribution to make to this world. They're you know, our system, the governing system that we have, people should look at that, you know, especially the government that we have now, both federal and provincial. They should have a look at that now and then figure out, you know, who plays a part. Right now, there is a Sundance going, where the women Sundance, and when the Sundance chief got her vision, it was about women of all colors. There's no boundary, because they're all the same. We live in a matriarchal system, supposedly, and a lot of us we don't act on that. We don't even believe that, and yet that's the way it was supposed to be. You know, so there's some things that we have to get in order, and when I do get things in order, and then I might be able to answer a little bit better. It's not my say. It's Creator is going to have that say into whether who's going to. That's the way it is. Who's going to get a pipe? It's going to come from up there. Not man. not. That's the way our Dakota people believe in things. So it's not for me to say if she should be wearing a headdress or.
Do you think that non-Indigenous politicians should get a headdress?
I think that that's, completely goes to whoever, again, had that vision in terms of the spiritual aspect. But I also think that, when you look back at Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau, and just even the giving of the Eagle staff, previously with, I think it was Perry Bellegarde. The reason why Justin Trudeau was given that headdress was because he green-lighted the inquiry to a missing and murdered Indigenous woman. And it wasn't even really, he just had a green light and said, yes, this is something that we are going to do, and it wasn't even put into action yet. And then with Stephen Harper, it was the 2008 apology for the residential school system and the legacy that follows from that. But not only when he apologized in June of 2008, a lot of people don't remember or, I guess, think back to that. A while after that, at the G20 summit, he stated that Canada didn't have a colonial history in terms of its history of a country. So I just feel, as a young person, growing up in these times in terms of the Canadian government and what these politicians represent, I feel we shouldn't be giving them such honors for doing the bare minimum. Because these things, such as the Missing Murdered Indigenous Women Girls Inquiry, as well as the apology for residential schools, those were things that we were pushing for generations, for years and years. And the moment that they take, notice to actually greenlight it or to do the bare minimum in which we've been telling them, we gift them right away. And I feel like it's always our side. We're always the ones that are kind of talking about that reconciliation and putting that foot forward. And trying to meet them where they're at. And I feel on their end, in terms of Canadian government, they also need to put and meet us where we're at currently and to also facilitate that process.
That was a good answer. Derek, what are your thoughts on that last question?
Well, it's a good question. I don't make any assumption that Rachel Notley received the headdress because of her title as a politician or as her title as the Premier of Alberta, and I think it's very important when you go into the ceremony space that you check your titles at the door. So what you allow for is you allow for the human being to be recognized for their acts. And to me, I don't know what she did in her humanity or in her capacity outside of her role as Premier, but maybe she did something profound. Maybe she's done work with the community that we don't even know about. So it's important that we don't jump to assumptions in terms of her worthiness of receiving it. But if we're doing ceremony to recognize politicians within their titles, I think that's a problem because it does create a confusion energy that leads to unintended consequences sometimes. And I know this exists, and I've seen it happen. We have to be careful not to bring hierarchy into the ceremony space, and that's where government has gone awry with us, because government is all about hierarchy. I mean, we've seen it play out with Jody Wilson-Raybould. We've seen it play out with so many people that go into that space who get pushed to the margins because they're not towing the party line or they're not high enough in the hierarchy to make the changes that they want. And we also have to remember that these governments, Section 91 and 92 governments, provincial and federal governments, were constructed and built to marginalize Indigenous people. Okay, and once you step into that forum, you have to understand the underpinnings of that entire system, because if you don't, you may trip through, making mistakes in that space and perpetuating the violence that government brings to our people. So you got to be very careful.
Does Jody Wilson-Raybould deserve a headdress?
Yes.
How bad of a week have they had this week?
It's been terrible for the Prime Minister.
We do have a comment from Meteor Hammer. They say, I think the only exceptions that could be made are those who are non-Indigenous, who are raised in Indigenous communities. It's not a fashion accessory for politicians. And then Lynn Gale, we'll finish it off with this question. Lynn Gale asks, why is it that people think the Plains headdresses are the only headdresses out there? Do not different nations have their own forms of headdresses?
They do. Different nations have their own way of doing things. They have their own costumes, they have their own dances, they have their own prayers, all kinds of things. But this is much, much more intense than just talking about headdress and feathers. That sacredness of the those feathers, i.e. the eagle. You know, it came to give up its life to help people. And if we don't take it that way, we're going to have to pay. I wonder if those people that got headdress, they know about what they need to do. Our people, when they got buried, they take their headdress and they bury it with them. And the people who wore those headdresses give great thanks to wearing a headdress because it came from the people, and because it came from a sacred vision. So that's how sacred. If you don't follow the laws of this sacred item, the headdress or the pipe, there's some things that you have to pay for. It's not. This isn't fooling around time. This is serious business.
Maybe Derek, we'll let you end it off. How important is it to be having these discussions about headdresses, not just with non-Indigenous people, but other Indigenous people?
I think it's very important because what it allows us to do is to talk about our ceremony and remind, not only our own people and our children, but other cultures from all over that, we have ceremonies that are sacred. They deserve to be talked about and recognized. And once again, I want to thank the Blackfoot people for raising the profile of this issue once again, so that we can hopefully have a constructive, respectful, and kind dialogue about the importance of these things.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I would like to thank our guests first, Derek Niepenak, Ivana Yellowback, Wambadi Wakita. We'd like to thank everyone on Facebook and YouTube for watching, for sending in questions, any comments that you have. We will be back again soon. See you all later.